The Galactic Tribunal's chamber stretched across what felt like miles of polished obsidian, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to swallow light itself. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the center of the vast space, her simple blue diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and biomechanical appendages of the alien representatives surrounding her. The air hummed with translation devices and the low murmur of a dozen different respiratory systems. High above on crystalline thrones sat the Tribunal of Seven, each representing one of the galaxy's major civilizations. Their forms varied wildly, the insectoid Kethvar with their chittering mandibles, the gaseous Velnari contained within their environmental suits, and the towering stone-like granite lords whose every movement sounded like grinding mountains. At the center throne sat Judge-Arbitrator Zixlon, a being whose species had never been properly identified but whose authority was absolute across known space. The charges against humanity were severe: violation of the Galactic Peace Accords, unauthorized expansion into restricted sectors, most damning of all, the complete destruction of a Confederation monitoring station. Sarah knew the truth. The station had fired first. Humanity had simply defended itself, but proving that in this chamber seemed impossible. The evidence is overwhelming, declared Prosecutor Velthak, his forearms gesturing dramatically as holographic displays showed the destroyed station. Humanity has shown itself to be a violent, expansionist species that threatens the stability of our peaceful galaxy. We demand immediate sanctions and containment protocols. Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Honored arbitrators, humanity requests the right to defend itself against these accusations. We have evidence that will clearly show— Evidence? Veltak's laugh was a sound like breaking glass. What evidence could a primitive species possibly provide that would counter our sensor readings, our witness testimonies, our irrefutable proof? The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, some supporting the prosecution, others calling for patience. Sarah felt the weight of her entire species' future pressing down on her shoulders. Everything humanity had worked for, their place among the stars, hung in the balance of this moment. Judge-Arbitrator Zixlon raised one appendage, and silence fell like a heavy blanket. When he spoke, his voice resonated with harmonic overtones that seemed to vibrate in Sarah's bones. The evidence presented is indeed compelling. However, the accused has the right to defend themselves according to ancient law. Sarah's heart leaped. Ancient law. She'd studied every precedent, every historical case that might give humanity an edge. We invoke that right, Your Honor. Very well, Zixlon intoned. Under the provisions of the primordial codes, which predate even this confederation, the accused may choose their method of defense. You may present counter-evidence through standard legal proceedings, submit to judgment by ordeal, or— He paused, as if the words were distasteful. Invoke the right of combat. A shocked silence filled the chamber. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The right of combat. A relic from the galaxy's violent past when disputes were settled through single combat rather than civilized debate. It hadn't been invoked in over 3,000 years, was considered barbaric by modern standards. Velthak's confidence seemed to waver slightly. Surely the primitive humans would not be so foolish as to— We invoke the right of combat, Sarah said clearly, her voice cutting through the prosecutor's words like a blade. The chamber exploded. Alien voices rose in shock, outrage, and what might have been excitement. Some species had legends of the ancient combat trials, stories passed down through generations of a time when disputes were settled, not with words but with strength and skill. Zixlon's harmonic voice cut through the chaos. The right of combat has been invoked. According to the primordial codes, the challenging party may name their champion. The accused party may name theirs. The combat will take place within 3 solar cycles. Victory grants the winner their desired outcome. For the prosecution, humanity's sanctions and containment. For the defense, complete exoneration of all charges. Velthak had regained his composure, his confidence returning like a rising tide. We name as our champion Krektor the Undefeated, warrior prime of the Saurian Empire. His victories number in the hundreds. His strength can crush steel. His claws can rend armor like paper. The chamber's screens lit up with images of the champion, a massive reptilian creature standing nearly 12 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating and equipped with razor-sharp claws that gleamed like polished metal. Videos showed him in previous combat trials moving with surprising speed for his size, devastating opponents with brutal efficiency. Sarah studied the images, her mind racing. Humanity had been caught completely off guard by this turn of events. They had no warriors prepared for such a trial, no champions trained in ancient combat. The weight of her species' survival pressed down on her as she realized the magnitude of what she'd just committed them to. And who? Zixalan asked, his harmonic voice carrying a note of what might have been curiosity. Does humanity name as their champion? Sarah straightened her shoulders, meeting the judge-arbitrator's gaze directly. We request the 3 solar cycles to prepare our champion, as is our right under the primordial codes. Granted, Zixalan declared. In 3 cycles we reconvene for combat. May the strongest prevail. As the session concluded and the various alien delegations began to file out, Sarah caught whispered conversations in a dozen languages. Most seemed to center on the same theme. What kind of primitive warrior could humanity possibly field against a creature like Krektor? Some aliens were already placing bets on how quickly the human champion would fall. Sarah activated her emergency communications array, sending a priority message across the quantum relay network back to Earth. Her message was simple but urgent. Need our best warrior. Ancient trial by combat. Species survival depends on it. 3 days to prepare. What she didn't mention in her message was the growing dread in her stomach. She'd studied Krektor's combat records during the brief recess. The creature wasn't just large and strong, he was cunning, experienced, and had never lost a single combat trial. His last opponent, a cybernetically enhanced warrior from the Machine Confederacy, had lasted less than 2 minutes. As she walked through the tribunal station's corridors back to her quarters, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she might have just doomed her entire species with a single decision. But there had been no choice. The evidence against humanity was fabricated but convincing. Trial by combat was their only chance, no matter how slim. She only hoped that whoever Earth sent would be enough. The transport ship Valkyrie docked at the tribunal station with barely 6 hours to spare before the combat trial. Sarah Chen waited anxiously at the airlock, surrounded by a small crowd of alien observers who had gathered to catch their first glimpse of humanity's champion. The betting pools had grown exponentially over the past 3 days, with odds heavily favoring Krektor. Some bookmakers weren't even taking bets on the human surviving more than 30 seconds. Sarah had received only one cryptic message from Earth Command: sending our finest. Trust the process. She'd spent 3 sleepless days imagining what kind of warrior they might send. Perhaps a cybernetically enhanced super soldier, or maybe one of the new genetically modified Marines she'd heard whispered about in classified briefings. Earth's military had produced some impressive specimens in recent decades. The airlock cycled through its sequence with a hiss of equalizing atmosphere. Sarah straightened her uniform and prepared to meet humanity's salvation. The inner door slid open with a soft pneumatic whisper. What emerged was not what she had expected. A figure stepped through the airlock that seemed to have walked straight out of Earth's medieval period. He stood about 6 feet tall, neither particularly large nor imposing compared to the aliens Sarah dealt with daily. What made him remarkable was his equipment. From head to toe, he was encased in gleaming plate armor that caught and reflected the station's lights like polished silver. The armor was clearly functional, not ceremonial. She could see the careful articulation at the joints, the subtle reinforcement patterns, the way it moved with him as he walked. A great helm covered his head completely, its visor down, giving him an anonymous but somehow noble appearance. A massive sword hung at his side, its crossguard decorated with intricate engravings. Over one shoulder, he carried a shield bearing, a simple but striking design. A blue field with silver stars arranged in a pattern Sarah recognized as Earth's flag constellation. The alien observers began murmuring among themselves in confusion. This was humanity's champion? This primitive-looking warrior with ancient weapons and armor? Some of them began laughing outright, their various forms of mirth creating a bizarre symphony of sounds. The knight, for that's clearly what he was meant to be, approached Sarah with measured steps that rang against the station's metal flooring. When he stopped in front of her, he removed his helm with practiced ease, revealing a weathered face with steady gray eyes and graying hair. He looked to be in his 50s, old for a warrior by human standards. Ambassador Chen, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't quite place. I am Sir Marcus Blackwood, Knight Commander of the Historical Combat Society. Earth Command has sent me to represent humanity in this trial. Sarah stared at him in shock. A knight? They sent an actual knight? This is trial by combat against a 12-foot reptilian killing machine, not a Renaissance fair. Marcus smiled slightly, the expression not reaching his eyes. I understand your concern, Ambassador. However, I assure you that both my equipment and my training are quite real. I've studied the available footage of our opponent extensively during the journey here. Studied? Sarah's voice rose slightly. This isn't a historical research project. Krektor has killed dozens of opponents in sanctioned combat. He's faster than anything his size should be, stronger than enhanced cybernetics, and his natural armor is virtually impenetrable to most weapons. Most weapons, yes, Marcus agreed calmly, but not all weapons. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted from the alien observers. Velthak, the prosecutor, had arrived with an entourage to inspect humanity's champion. The alien's forearms gestured dismissively as he approached. This is humanity's great warrior? Velthak's translator made his laugh sound like breaking glass. This primitive in his ancient costume? Surely this is some kind of joke. Marcus turned to face the prosecutor, his movements causing his armor to sing softly with metallic harmonics. I am Sir Marcus Blackwood, duly appointed champion of humanity. I stand ready to meet your champion in honorable combat. Velthak circled around Marcus like a predator examining prey. Honorable combat? You bring swords and shields to face claws that can rend starship hulls? Armor made of primitive metal, against natural weapons that can pierce battleship plating. I bring what has served humanity well for centuries, Marcus replied evenly. Steel, skill, and courage. The alien crowd was growing larger, word spreading through the station that humanity's champion had arrived. Most seemed to view Marcus as either a curiosity or a tragedy about to unfold. Some of the more militant, species representatives were openly mocking, while others appeared genuinely puzzled by humanity's choice. Sarah pulled Marcus aside as Velthak continued his inspection and commentary. Look, I appreciate Earth's confidence in you, but I need to understand what I'm working with here. What makes you think you can possibly survive against Krektor? Marcus set his helm down on a nearby surface and began checking his equipment with methodical precision. Ambassador, I've spent my entire adult life studying and practicing historical combat techniques, not as a hobby or academic exercise, but as a dedicated warrior art. The Historical Combat Society isn't a group of weekend enthusiasts. We're researchers and practitioners who've worked to perfect fighting methods that proved effective for thousands of years. But this is different, Sarah insisted. This is alien physiology, enhanced strength, natural weapons. Combat is combat, Marcus interrupted gently. The principles remain the same regardless of the opponent. Leverage, timing, technique, and the will to win. I've faced opponents larger and stronger than myself many times. Size and strength are advantages, certainly, but they're not insurmountable ones. He gestured to his sword. This blade was forged using techniques developed over centuries of warfare. The steel is alloyed with metals that didn't exist in the historical period it represents, but the design principles are proven. The armor incorporates modern materials and manufacturing while maintaining classical form and function. Sarah noticed, now that while the armor looked medieval, closer inspection revealed subtle differences. The metal had an unusual sheen, and the joints moved with a fluidity that suggested advanced engineering. So it's not exactly historical recreation? Think of it as historical evolution, Marcus explained. We took designs that worked for centuries and enhanced them with modern understanding and materials. The sword can cut through most known substances. The armor can turn aside energy weapons and kinetic impacts that would destroy conventional protection. A new voice joined the conversation, speaking in heavily accented Standard Galactic. Most impressive craftsmanship. They turned to see a delegate from the Granite Lords approaching, a being that looked like a walking mountain of living stone. These creatures were among the galaxy's most respected engineers and metallurgists. I am Stone Speaker Tor Malus, the being rumbled, his voice like grinding boulders. I have examined your equipment from distance. The metallurgy is fascinating. May I inspect more closely? Marcus nodded and offered his sword for examination. The granite lord's massive stone fingers moved over the blade with surprising delicacy. Remarkable, Tormala said. This alloy, I do not recognize all components. The molecular structure is unlike standard industrial materials, and the edge. He ran a sensor appendage along the blade. Monomolecular in places, yet flexible and unbreakable. How is this achieved? Trade secrets, Marcus replied with a slight smile. But thank you for the professional assessment. As word of the Granite Lord's interest spread, other technical specialists began approaching to examine Marcus's equipment. What had started as mockery was slowly shifting to curiosity and, in some cases, concern. Sarah began to feel the first glimmers of hope. Perhaps Earth Command hadn't sent a death sentence after all. Maybe, just maybe, they knew something the rest of the galaxy didn't about the art of warfare. The announcement echoed through the station's corridors. Champions to the preparation chambers. Combat commences in 4 hours. Marcus donned his helm once more, the visor coming down with a decisive click. Time to go to work, Ambassador. Wish me luck. Luck, Sarah whispered, though she found herself beginning to believe that luck might not be the most important factor in the coming battle. The combat arena was a marvel of engineering that spoke to the galaxy's violent past, built into an asteroid that had been hollowed out specifically for trial by combat. It could accommodate thousands of spectators in atmosphere-controlled viewing galleries that surrounded a circular fighting space nearly 100 meters across. The floor was polished stone, carved with ancient symbols from dozens of civilizations that had contributed to the primordial codes. Sarah took her place in the human delegation's booth, a small section that felt dwarfed by the massive alien crowd surrounding them. Word of the unusual trial had spread across the galaxy through subspace networks, and representatives from hundreds of species had traveled to witness what many believed would be the shortest combat trial in recorded history. The betting had reached astronomical proportions. Conservative estimates suggested that over 90% of wagers favored Krektor, with most bets focused not on who would win, but on how quickly the human would fall. Some gambling pools had even opened side bets on whether the human champion would land a single blow before being defeated. In the preparation chambers beneath the arena, Marcus Blackwood sat in meditation, his armor laid out before him with methodical precision. Each piece had been inspected, cleaned, and blessed according to traditions that stretched back to humanity's earliest warriors. The ritual was as much about mental preparation as physical readiness. A soft chime indicated 15 minutes until combat. Marcus began the process of donning his armor, each piece fitted with the practiced ease of someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times. The underpadding came first, designed to distribute impact and regulate temperature. Then the individual plates, legs, torso, arms, each one locking into place with nearly silent mechanisms. The sword came last. He drew it from its sheath and examined the blade in the chamber's light. The metal seemed to drink in the illumination, its edge disappearing into sharpness that seemed to cut the air itself. This wasn't the decorative replica some observers assumed. This was a weapon designed for one purpose: to end lives efficiently and effectively. Meanwhile, in the opposite preparation chamber, Krektor the Undefeated prepared in his own way. The massive Saurian warrior required no armor. His natural hide was tougher than most manufactured protection. Instead, he performed a series of ritual movements that showcased his terrifying capabilities. Each swipe of his claws left deep gouges in the reinforced walls. When he roared, the sound resonated through the entire asteroid structure. Representatives from various species had been permitted to observe both champions preparing. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Where Krektor displayed raw, overwhelming power, the human performed precise, controlled movements. Where the Saurian's preparation was all about intimidation and demonstration of strength, Marcus's ritual was quiet, focused, almost contemplative. "Look at the size difference," whispered a delegate from the Arthropod Collective, his chittering translated by universal interpreters. "The Saurian mass is at least 4 times the human. His reach advantage is enormous. Natural weapons versus primitive metal," added a representative from the Crystal Hegemony. This won't be combat. It will be execution. Above in the viewing gallery, similar conversations echoed in dozens of languages. Technical analysts provided commentary for broadcast across the galaxy, most focusing on the overwhelming physical advantages Krektor possessed. Combat specialists from various military organizations offered predictions, and the consensus was universal. The human had no chance. The only voice of dissent came from an unexpected source. General Krelvoth of the warrior caste had remained silent during most of the pre-combat analysis, but finally spoke when pressed by other military observers. "Something troubles me about this human," the grizzled veteran admitted. "I have seen many warriors prepare for combat. This one shows no fear, no doubt. Either he is suicidal or he knows something we do not. What could a primitive species possibly know about combat that we do not?" scoffed Commander Telvax of the Naval Intelligence Division. Krelvoth's scarred face remained thoughtful. "That, Commander, is exactly what concerns me." The 15-minute warning echoed through both preparation chambers. Marcus completed his armor fitting and lifted his helm. Before donning it, he spoke a quiet prayer, not to any specific deity but to the spirits of all warriors who had stood in similar circumstances throughout history. Then the helm came down and Sir Marcus Blackwood ceased to exist as an individual. In his place stood something older and more primal. A knight, a guardian, a warrior whose purpose transcended personal survival. The great doors to the arena began to grind open. Ancient mechanisms maintained for millennia despite the rarity of their use, operated with perfect precision. The sound reverberated through the hollow asteroid like a funeral bell. Krektor emerged first from the eastern gate, and the crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The massive Saurian warrior stood nearly 12 feet tall at his full height, his natural armor plating gleaming under the arena's lights. Each step left deep impressions in the stone floor. His claws, each nearly a foot long, caught the light like polished steel. When he raised his arms and roared his challenge to the crowd, the sound was so powerful that several viewing galleries had to increase their atmospheric shielding. The arena erupted in cheers, roars, and various forms of alien approval. Betting pools closed as final wagers were placed, most assuming the combat would be over within minutes. From the western gate, Marcus emerged to a much more subdued reception. The human knight walked with measured steps toward the center of the arena, his armor singing softly with each movement. Where Krektor had played to the crowd, Marcus ignored the spectators entirely, his focus solely on his opponent. His shield bore the simple design of Earth's star pattern, and his sword remained sheathed at his side. The size difference was even more pronounced in the arena's vast space. Krektor looked like a prehistoric monster, while Marcus appeared almost delicate by comparison. The visual impact was so striking that even some human sympathizers in the crowd began to doubt the wisdom of this choice. Judge Arbitrator Zixalan's harmonic voice filled the arena through hidden speakers. "Champions of the prosecution and defense, you stand in the circle of ancient law. Combat will continue until one yields, one falls, or one dies. There are no other rules. The ancestors watch. The galaxy witnesses. Let justice be decided by strength and will." The two warriors approached the center of the arena, stopping when they were roughly 20 meters apart. Krektor immediately began his intimidation display, roaring, clawing the air, demonstrating the devastating power he would bring to bear. His movements were fluid despite his size, showing the dangerous combination of mass and agility that had made him undefeated. Marcus simply stood and watched, making no moves toward his weapon. His stillness was complete, like a statue of a knight waiting for some distant trumpet call. Behind his visor, gray eyes studied his opponent with clinical detachment, noting stance, movement patterns, the slight favoring of the left leg that suggested an old injury. The contrast between the two champions was so stark that even the most bloodthirsty spectators fell silent, waiting to see what would happen when these two radically different approaches to warfare finally met. Zixalan's voice rang out one final time. Let combat begin. The arena held its collective breath as the trial that would determine humanity's fate was about to commence. The moment Judge Arbitrator Zixalan declared combat begun, the arena transformed from a place of anticipation to one of deadly silence. Thousands of alien spectators leaned forward in their seats. Sensors and recording devices focused on the two warriors who would determine humanity's fate. Krektor wasted no time with further posturing. The massive Saurian warrior launched himself forward with surprising speed, his powerful legs propelling his enormous frame across the stone floor. Each step cracked the ancient surface as he built momentum. Claws extended and mouth open in a roar that echoed off the arena walls. His approach was direct and overwhelming, the charge of a creature that had never needed subtlety to win. Marcus remained motionless until the last possible second. As Krektor closed the distance, covering 20 meters in barely 3 heartbeats, the knight finally moved. His hand found his sword hilt, just as the Saurian's massive claws swept through the space where his head had been a moment before. Marcus had stepped aside with minimal movement, drawing his blade in the same motion. The crowd gasped as they witnessed the first exchange. Krektor's claws, each capable of rending starship hull plating, met Marcus's sword in a shower of sparks that lit up the arena. The impact rang like a struck bell, the harmonics of metal on natural weapons creating an almost musical note that hung in the air. What shocked the spectators wasn't the impact itself, but what happened next. Krektor's claws, which had never been turned aside by any weapon, actually skittered across the knight's blade. Deep scoring appeared on the Saurian's natural weapons, the first damage he had ever sustained in combat. Krektor jerked his hand back, staring at his scored claws in disbelief. In the viewing galleries, alien combat analysts scrambled to adjust their predictions. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Natural Saurian claws were among the hardest substances known to biology, enhanced by their warrior culture's training methods. Impossible, breathed Commander Telvax from the military observation deck. No manufactured weapon should be able to damage Saurian battle claws. General Krelvoth's scarred face showed the first hint of interest he'd displayed all day. Perhaps we underestimated human metallurgy. In the arena, Krektor's surprise quickly transformed into rage. The Saurian warrior had built his reputation on the invincibility of his natural weapons. To see them damaged by a primitive human blade was beyond insult. It was impossible reality challenging everything he understood about combat. With a roar that shook dust from the arena's ancient ceiling, Krektor attacked again. This time his assault was more calculated, using his massive reach advantage to strike from multiple angles. His claws became a blur of deadly motion, each swipe capable of disemboweling the human knight. Marcus moved like water, his sword work a study in precision and economy of motion. Where Krektor employed overwhelming force, the knight used technique refined over centuries of human warfare. His blade seemed to be everywhere at once, intercepting strikes, deflecting claws, never quite where Krektor expected it to be. The arena floor began to show the violence of their exchange. Deep gouges appeared where Krektor's claws struck stone instead of flesh. Sparks flew with each contact between claw and blade, creating a light show that had the alien crowd transfixed. But Marcus wasn't just defending. As Krektor overextended on a particularly vicious swipe, the knight's blade flicked out like a striking snake. The monomolecular edge found a gap in the Saurian's natural armor plating, drawing a line of dark blood across Krektor's ribs. The crowd erupted. First blood to the human champion, something that hadn't happened to Krektor in over 50 combats. The Saurian warrior looked down at the wound in shock, touching the blood with one massive finger as if unable to believe it was real. Sarah Chen gripped the railing of the human delegation booth so hard her knuckles went white. "He actually hurt him," she whispered. Marcus actually hurt him. The shift in momentum was palpable throughout the arena. Betting pools that had been closed were suddenly reopening as odds makers scrambled to adjust their calculations. The human champion wasn't just surviving, he was competing. Krektor's next attack carried desperation along with fury. The wound, while not serious, had shattered his confidence in his own invincibility. He pressed his assault with renewed vigor, using his full reach and strength in combinations that had proven lethal to dozens of previous opponents. Marcus gave ground for the first time, his boots ringing against the stone as he was forced backward by the relentless assault. But his retreat was controlled, measured. He was drawing Krektor deeper into combinations that left the massive warrior increasingly exposed. The knight's shield came into play now, its ancient design proving surprisingly effective against alien claws. Where direct blocks would have been impossible against such strength, Marcus used angles and deflection, turning aside strikes rather than meeting them head-on. His sword work became a deadly dance, striking at vulnerable points between armor plates. targeting joints and soft tissue. Krektor was bleeding from a dozen small wounds now, none individually serious but cumulatively beginning to affect his performance. The Saurian's movements, while still powerful, began to show the first signs of fatigue. His breathing became more labored, his strikes slightly less precise. "How is this possible?" Velthak demanded from the prosecution booth. "Krektor is the greatest warrior of his generation. He should have ended this already." "Perhaps," came a calm voice from behind him. "Your champion was never as invincible as you believed." The prosecutor turned to see Stone Speaker Tormalis, the granite lord who had examined Marcus's equipment earlier. The massive being's stone features showed what might have been satisfaction. "What do you mean?" Velthak snapped. "I told you the human's metallurgy was remarkable," Tormalis rumbled. "That blade can cut through materials that would turn aside energy weapons. That armor can absorb impacts that would shatter conventional protection. Your warrior fights with natural weapons against technology he cannot comprehend." In the arena, the combat had reached a crucial juncture. Krektor, now desperate and bleeding, gathered himself for what appeared to be a final all-out assault. He reared up to his full height, spread his arms wide, and prepared to bring both sets of claws down in a strike that would either end the combat or leave him fatally exposed. Marcus saw the opening and made his choice. Instead of retreating further, he stepped forward into Krektor's reach. His shield rose to catch one set of descending claws, while his sword struck upward with surgical precision. The arena fell, silent except for the sound of steel piercing flesh. Marcus's blade had found the gap beneath. Krektor's left arm, sliding between armor plates to penetrate deep into the Saurian's torso. Not a killing blow, but devastating nonetheless. Dark blood began to flow freely as the knight withdrew his weapon and stepped back. Krektor staggered, one massive hand pressed to the wound. For the first time in his career, the undefeated champion looked truly vulnerable. His breathing came in ragged gasps and his stance wavered. The crowd was completely silent now, all of them witnessing something unprecedented. The human knight stood ready, his armor blood-stained but intact, his weapon steady in his grip. He waited with infinite patience for Krektor's next move. But for the first time in his life, the Saurian warrior wasn't sure he had one. Blood dripped steadily from Krektor's wounds onto the ancient stone floor, each drop echoing in the unnaturally quiet arena. The massive Saurian warrior had never experienced anything like this. The burning pain of deep cuts, the weakness that came with blood loss, the creeping doubt that perhaps he wasn't as invincible as 3,000 years of victories had led him to believe. Marcus stood 15 meters away, his sword held in a ready position that spoke of absolute confidence. His armor showed scratches and dents from Krektor's claws, but the knight himself appeared uninjured. More importantly, he showed no signs of fatigue despite the intensity of their exchange. His breathing remained controlled, his stance solid. "Yield," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the arena through his helmet's external speakers. "You've fought with honor. There's no shame in recognizing when you're outmatched." The offer sent shockwaves through the viewing galleries. In the history of trial by combat, it was almost unheard of for a winning combatant to offer mercy to their opponent. The gesture spoke to an unusual code of honor that most alien species found difficult to understand. Krektor's response was a roar of pure rage. The suggestion that he might yield was more insulting than any physical wound. He was Krektor the undefeated, champion of the Saurian Empire, heir to a warrior tradition that valued death before dishonor. The fact that this small human had managed to wound him was already a humiliation beyond bearing. "Never," the Saurian warrior bellowed, spittle flying from his massive jaws. "I am the champion of champions. I do not yield to inferior species." Despite his words, Krektor's next attack lacked the overwhelming confidence of his earlier assaults. Pain and blood loss had slowed his reflexes, and doubt had crept into his combat calculations. His strikes, while still powerful enough to crush stone, were more tentative, more defensive. Marcus met the renewed assault with the same calm efficiency he'd shown throughout the battle. His blade work was a masterclass in applied physics, using leverage, timing, and precise angles to turn aside attacks that should have overwhelmed him through sheer force. Each time Krektor committed to a strike, the knight's sword was there to meet it, sparks flying as monomolecular steel met natural weapons. But now Marcus began to press his advantage. Where before he had been content to defend and counterattack, He started to dictate the flow of combat. His movements became more aggressive, forcing Krektor to respond rather than initiate. The knight's shield became an offensive weapon, its reinforced edges striking pressure points and vulnerable joints with surgical precision. In the viewing galleries, military analysts from across the galaxy watched with growing amazement and concern. What they were witnessing challenged fundamental assumptions about combat effectiveness and species superiority. "The human's technique is extraordinary," admitted General Krelvoth to his fellow officers. "I've studied warrior cultures from hundreds of worlds, and I've never seen such a complete integration of offense and defense." "But he's just one individual," protested Commander Telvax. "Even if he wins this trial, what does it prove about humanity as a whole?" "It proves," came a new voice, "and that we may have seriously underestimated them." The officers turned to see Admiral Vexithari, Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Fleet. She rarely attended such proceedings, and her presence indicated that this trial had implications far beyond the specific charges against humanity. "Admiral?" General Krelvoth inquired. "I've been reviewing the intelligence reports on the incident that started this trial," Admiral Vexithari explained. "The human ship that allegedly destroyed our monitoring station was outnumbered 10-1. The official reports claim it was an unprovoked attack. But watching this combat makes me wonder if perhaps our monitoring station fired first, and the humans simply defended themselves more effectively than we thought possible." In the arena, the tide of battle had definitively turned. Marcus had opened several more wounds on Krektor's massive frame, each cut precise and calculated to maximize blood loss while avoiding vital organs. The knight was deliberately prolonging the combat, wearing down his opponent rather than going for a quick kill. Krektor's movements had slowed noticeably. The proud warrior who had entered the arena like a force of nature now stumbled occasionally, his breathing labored and his strikes increasingly desperate. Dark blood stained the stone floor in an expanding pool around his feet. "Why don't you finish him?" shouted someone from the crowd, a voice that the universal translators identified as coming from the Arthropod collective delegation. Marcus paused in his assault, turning slightly toward the voice. "Because," he said, his words carrying through the arena's acoustics, "the death of a brave warrior should serve a purpose beyond mere victory. Krektor fights for his people's honor. I can respect that even if I must defeat him." The statement sent ripples of confusion through the alien observers. Most galactic species viewed combat as a means to an end. Victory was the only goal that mattered. The concept of showing respect for an enemy, of acknowledging their courage even while defeating them, was foreign to most military traditions. But Krektor himself seemed to understand. The massive Saurian straightened despite his wounds, meeting Marcus's gaze through the knight's visor. "You fight with honor, human," he admitted, his voice carrying new respect. "But I cannot yield. My people's traditions forbid it." "I understand," Marcus replied. "Then let us finish this properly." What followed was the most elegant display of martial skill many in the arena had ever witnessed. Marcus abandoned his defensive tactics and engaged Krektor directly, sword against claws, technique against raw power. But now the outcome was never in doubt. The knight's blade found gaps in the Saurian's natural armor with mechanical precision, each strike designed to disable rather than kill. Within minutes, Krektor's left arm hung useless at his side, tendon severed by a precise cut behind the elbow. His right leg could barely support his weight after Marcus's sword found the pressure point behind the knee. Still, the proud warrior fought on, but each exchange left him weaker and more vulnerable. The end came suddenly. Krektor overcommitted to a final desperate strike with his remaining functional arm. Marcus stepped inside the attack, his shield catching the Saurian's wrist while his sword point came to rest against Krektor's throat, just below the jaw where the natural armor was thinnest. The arena fell absolutely silent. Marcus had won, completely and decisively. The knight who had been dismissed as a primitive curiosity had defeated the galaxy's most feared warrior with what appeared to be relative ease. But instead of delivering the killing stroke, Marcus stepped back and lowered his weapon. "Yield now," he said quietly. "You've proven your courage beyond any doubt. Live to fight again another day." Krektor looked around the arena at the thousands of alien faces watching him. His entire identity had been built on being undefeated, invincible. That was gone now, shattered by a human knight who fought with weapons and techniques the galaxy had forgotten existed. But perhaps, Krektor thought, there were things more important than personal glory. I yield, he said, the words carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics. The human champion has bested me fairly. I acknowledge his victory. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of alien voices. Shock, amazement, and in some cases, fear. Humanity's champion had not just won. He had done so while showing mercy to a defeated opponent. The implications of this victory would resonate far beyond the trial itself. Judge-arbitrator Zixalan's harmonic voice cut through the chaos. Combat concluded. Victory to the human champion. The charges against humanity are dismissed. The aftermath of Marcus's victory created chaos throughout the tribunal station. Emergency medical teams rushed to treat Krektor's wounds, while crowds of alien dignitaries, military officials, and media representatives clamored for interviews with the human champion, who had achieved the impossible. Security forces struggled to maintain order as thousands of spectators tried to get closer to the arena floor. Marcus himself remained remarkably composed amid the pandemonium. He had removed his helmet and was carefully cleaning his sword with a cloth from his equipment pack, performing the ritual maintenance that any proper knight would conduct after combat. His gray hair was damp with sweat, and several minor cuts marked his face where Krektor's claws had found gaps in his armor. But otherwise he appeared unaffected by what had just transpired. Sarah Chen pushed through the crowd with her diplomatic credentials, finally reaching the arena floor where Marcus stood surrounded by a growing circle of alien observers. Some maintained respectful distances, clearly awed by what they had witnessed. Others pressed closer, trying to get detailed scans of his equipment or recordings of his voice. "Marcus," Sarah called out as she approached. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" The knight looked up from his sword maintenance and smiled. "Nothing serious, Ambassador. A few scratches, but the armor did its job." He gestured to the chaos around them. "I take it the victory has caused some excitement?" "Excitement?" Sarah laughed, the sound carrying an edge of hysteria. "Marcus, you just changed the entire galactic perception of humanity. Half the military commanders here are reassessing their threat evaluations of our species. The other half are trying to figure out how to recruit you." As if summoned by her words, Admiral Vexthari approached with a small entourage of high-ranking military officials. The Admiral was a member of the Velnari species, gaseous beings contained within sophisticated environmental suits, and her approach was marked by the soft hiss of her artificial respiratory system. "Sir Marcus," Admiral Vexthari said, her translated voice carrying notes of respect that hadn't been there before the combat. "I am Admiral Vexthari of the Galactic Defense Fleet. Your performance today was illuminating." Marcus inclined his head politely. "Admiral, I'm honored by your attention." "I must ask," the Admiral continued, "is your skill representative of human military capabilities in general, or are you an exceptional individual?" It was a question that had been on everyone's mind since the combat ended. The implications of the answer would reshape diplomatic and military relationships across the galaxy. Marcus considered his response carefully. "I am skilled at what I do, Admiral, but I'm hardly unique among my people. Earth has thousands of warriors trained in similar traditions. We've spent centuries refining these techniques, not as museum pieces, but as living, evolving arts of war." The military officials exchanged glances that spoke volumes. If Marcus was representative rather than exceptional, then their assumptions about human military capabilities needed serious revision. General Krelvoth stepped forward. "The weapons and armor you employed, are these standard issue for human forces?" "This particular equipment is my own," Marcus admitted, "but similar technology is available to our military units. We've found that combining historical proven designs with modern materials and manufacturing techniques produces superior results to conventional approaches." Before the Admiral could ask another question, a commotion near the arena's medical station drew everyone's attention. Krektor, his wounds bandaged and treated, was insisting on approaching the human champion despite his medical team's protests. The massive Saurian warrior moved slowly, favoring his injured leg and keeping his damaged arm immobilized against his chest, but his posture remained proud, and his eyes showed a clarity that had been absent during the final stages of their combat. The crowd parted respectfully as Krektor approached Marcus. The two warriors faced each other in the center of the arena floor, surrounded by thousands of spectators holding their collective breath. "Human knight," Krektor said, his translated voice carrying formal tones. "I have fought for 3 decades without defeat. In that time, I believed I understood the nature of combat, the limits of skill, the boundaries of honor." Marcus waited silently for the Saurian to continue. "Today you have shown me that I understood very little," Krektor continued. "Your victory was complete, but you offered mercy when you could have claimed my life. You fought with techniques I had never encountered, weapons I had never faced. Most importantly, you conducted yourself with honor even toward an enemy." The great warrior reached behind his back and withdrew something that made the crowd gasp. His personal combat claw, a ceremonial weapon that served as both badge of rank and symbol of warrior status among his people. "I offer you this token of respect," Krektor said, extending the claw toward Marcus. "Among my people, it is given only to those who have proven themselves worthy opponents. You have earned it through skill, courage, and honor." Marcus accepted the gift with visible reverence, understanding the significance of the gesture, even if he didn't fully comprehend its cultural implications. "I am honored by your respect, Krektor. You fought with tremendous courage and your skills are formidable. In different circumstances, we might have been allies rather than opponents." "Perhaps," Krektor agreed. "We still might be." The exchange between the two warriors had a profound effect on the watching crowd. Here was something most galactic civilizations had lost in their technological advancement: a warrior's code that transcended species, politics, and immediate circumstances. The respect shown between former enemies spoke to values that many thought extinct in the modern galaxy. Prosecutor Velthak pushed through the crowd, his forearms gesticulating wildly. "This changes nothing," he declared. "One combat trial cannot erase the evidence of human aggression." Admiral Vexithari turned to face the prosecutor, her environmental suit's optical sensors focusing on him with mechanical precision. "Actually, prosecutor, it changes everything. I've been reviewing the original incident reports during the combat, and several inconsistencies have become apparent." "Inconsistencies?" Sarah Chen stepped forward, sensing an opportunity. The human vessel that allegedly attacked our monitoring station was identified as a small exploration ship with minimal armaments, Admiral Vexithari explained. Yet it managed to destroy a fully equipped military monitoring platform. The official reports claimed the humans fired first. But given what we've witnessed today regarding human defensive capabilities, I suspect the truth may be different. She activated a holographic display that showed the sensor readings from the incident. "Notice the energy signatures. The first weapons discharge came from the monitoring station, not the human vessel. The humans didn't attack. They defended themselves, and they did so more effectively than we thought possible." Velthak's confident demeanor began to crumble. The sensors could be mistaken. Equipment failures happen. Multiple independent sensor arrays all showing the same sequence of events? Admiral Vexthari's tone was skeptical. "I think not, prosecutor. I believe the monitoring station fired on the human ship without provocation, and the humans simply defended themselves with skill we didn't know they possessed." Judge Arbitrator Zixalan's harmonic voice cut through the growing arguments. "The combat trial has concluded with humanity's vindication. However, these new revelations suggest that a broader investigation into the original incident may be warranted." As the implications of the Admiral's analysis spread through the crowd, Sarah felt a profound sense of relief wash over her. Not only had Marcus won the trial, but the victory had exposed the flawed evidence that had led to the charges in the first place. But perhaps more importantly, humanity had announced itself to the galaxy as something more than a primitive species stumbling through space. They had proven themselves capable of defending their interests with skill, honor, and effectiveness that the galaxy's established powers had never imagined possible. The knight cleaned his sword one final time and sheathed it with ceremonial precision. His work here was done, but Sarah suspected that the consequences of this day would reshape humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. 3 months after the trial by combat, the Galactic Confederation looked very different than it had before Marcus Blackwood stepped into that ancient arena. The human victory had triggered a cascade of revelations, investigations, and diplomatic realignments that continued to reshape interstellar politics. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in her new office aboard Harmony Station, humanity's first permanent diplomatic facility in Confederation space. The station was a gift from the Granite Lords, who had been so impressed by human metallurgy and engineering that they'd insisted on establishing formal trade relations. Through the office's transparent aluminum windows, she could see ships from dozens of species docking at the station's various ports. A soft chime announced an incoming communication. Sarah activated the holographic display to see Marcus Blackwood's familiar face, though he was no longer wearing his knight's armor. Instead, he wore the simple uniform of Earth's new Galactic Liaison Corps, a military organization established specifically to interface with alien civilizations. "Ambassador," Marcus said with a slight smile, "I have the weekly report from the training facilities." Over the past 3 months, Marcus had become something of a celebrity throughout Confederation space. What had started as curiosity about human combat techniques had evolved into formal requests for training exchanges. Representatives from dozens of species wanted to study humanity's approach to warfare, particularly the integration of historical techniques with modern technology. "How are our guests adapting to the program?" Sarah asked. "Better than expected," Marcus replied. "The Saurian delegation has been particularly enthusiastic. Krektor himself has proven to be an excellent student and teacher. His insights into natural weapons techniques have helped our instructors develop new training methods." The friendship that had developed between Marcus and Krektor had surprised everyone, including the two warriors themselves. What had begun as mutual respect had evolved into a genuine partnership as they worked together to establish the Confederation's first interspecies warrior training academy. "Any challenges?" Marcus's expression grew more serious. "The Velnari delegation is struggling with the physical requirements, but they're adapting our techniques for their energy-based combat forms. More concerning is the intelligence we're gathering about the original incident that led to the trial." Sarah's attention sharpened. "What have you learned?" "Admiral Vexithari's investigation has uncovered evidence of a broader conspiracy," Marcus explained. "The monitoring station that attacked our exploration ship wasn't acting on official orders. There's a faction within the Confederation, military, that's been deliberately provoking conflicts with newer species to justify expanded military budgets and increased restrictions on expansion." The revelation didn't surprise Sarah entirely. Political corruption and military manipulation existed in every civilization, and the Confederation was too large and diverse to be immune to such problems. But the implications were staggering. "How widespread is this faction?" "Still being determined," Marcus said. "But it appears they've been involved in similar incidents with at least 6 other species over the past decade." The human case was just the most recent. Before Sarah could respond, another chime announced a priority communication. She accepted the call to see Judge Arbitrator Zixalan's distinctive form materializing in her office. "Ambassador Chen," "Sir Marcus," the Judge Arbitrator's harmonic voice filled the room. "I trust you are both well?" "Your Honor," Sarah replied formally. "What can we do for you?" "I am calling to inform you of several developments that may interest humanity," Zixalan explained. "First, Prosecutor Velthak has been formally censured for presenting falsified evidence during your trial. He will face criminal charges for his role in the conspiracy that Admiral Vexithari has uncovered." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. Justice delayed was still justice. "Second," Zixalan continued, "the Confederation Council has voted to offer humanity full membership status, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Your species' performance during the trial, and the subsequent investigations it triggered, have demonstrated that humanity possesses the qualities we value in Confederation partners. Full membership, something that typically took decades for new species to achieve. Humanity would have a voice in galactic governance, access to advanced technologies, and protection under Confederation law. We're honored by the offer," Sarah said carefully. "I'll need to consult with Earth Command, but I believe they'll accept." "There is one additional matter," Zixalan added. "The Council has also voted to establish a new position, Galactic Combat Arbitrator. This individual would be responsible for overseeing trial by combat procedures and training Confederation peacekeepers in advanced combat techniques." Marcus straightened in his chair. "Your Honor, the position is yours if you want it, Sir Marcus. Your performance in the arena and your subsequent work with interspecies training have convinced the Council that you're uniquely qualified for this role." Sarah looked at Marcus through the holographic display, seeing the conflict in his expression. The position would make him one of the most influential humans in galactic politics, but it would also take him far from Earth and the simple life he'd known. "I'm honored by the offer," Marcus said slowly. "May I have time to consider it?" "Of course," Zixlon replied. "But do not take too long. The galaxy has become a more dangerous place since your trial exposed these conspiracies. We need someone with your skills and integrity to help maintain the peace." After the judge-arbitrator signed off, Sarah and Marcus sat in comfortable silence for several moments, both processing the magnitude of what they'd just been offered. "It's what you wanted, isn't it?" Marcus finally asked. "Full Confederation membership for humanity?" "It's more than I dared hope for," Sarah admitted. "When I invoked trial by combat, I thought I was signing humanity's death warrant. Instead, we've gained respect, allies, and now full membership in the galactic community. And all it took was an old knight with a sharp sword," Marcus said with a wry smile. "No," Sarah corrected. "It took a human being willing to stand up for his species when everything seemed hopeless. It took courage, skill, and honor, qualities that apparently the galaxy had forgotten existed." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The position Zixlon offered, it would mean leaving Earth permanently, becoming more of a galactic citizen than a human one. "The choice is yours," Sarah said. "But consider this, 3 months ago humanity was facing sanctions and containment. Now we're being offered leadership roles in galactic governance. Someone has to represent our interests and our values at that level." "Our values," Marcus repeated thoughtfully.
"Honor, courage, the willingness to show mercy to defeated enemies."
"Are those uniquely human qualities?" "Maybe not uniquely human," Sarah replied, "but apparently rare enough in galactic civilization that they made quite an impression." Through her office windows, Sarah watched ships from across the galaxy docking at Harmony Station. Humans worked alongside aliens, sharing knowledge and building relationships that would have been impossible just months ago. The trial by combat that had seemed like humanity's greatest crisis had become their greatest opportunity. Marcus finally nodded. "I'll accept the position. Someone needs to make sure that honor and mercy remain part of galactic justice. And if that someone happens to be a knight from a supposedly primitive species," he smiled, "well, perhaps the galaxy needs to be reminded that sometimes the old ways are the best ways." As the communication ended, Sarah reflected on the strange turns that fate could take. A single combat trial had not only vindicated humanity, but had begun to reshape an entire galactic civilization. The knight who had walked into that arena as a curiosity had emerged as a leader, a teacher, and a symbol of values that the galaxy desperately needed. In the months and years to come, historians would debate the broader implications of Marcus Blackwood's victory. But for Sarah Chen, sitting in her office aboard humanity's first galactic diplomatic station, the meaning was clear. When faced with seemingly impossible odds, sometimes all it took was the courage to stand up and fight for what was right. The galaxy had challenged humanity to prove itself worthy of respect. A knight in ancient armor had answered that challenge with steel, skill, and honor. And in doing so, he had shown the galaxy what humanity could offer, not just as warriors but as partners in building a better future among the stars.